The clock on the microwave blinked 12:03 a.m. as I leaned against the kitchen counter, absently stirring a mug of cocoa. The dim light from the living room bled into the kitchen. My husband, Luke, was sprawled on the couch, scrolling on his tablet with the kind of focus he usually reserved for the sports section.
"You're gonna burn your tongue on that, you know,"
he said without looking up. His voice carried that familiar teasing lilt. I rolled my eyes. "Thanks for the warning, Captain Obvious." Outside, the city had quieted down, as it always did at this hour. We lived on the 5th floor of an old apartment building in the kind of neighborhood that looked charming during the day and vaguely menacing at night. The building itself was a relic of the 70s, with creaky floors and thin walls that carried the muffled voices of our neighbors. Tonight, though, the usual noise was absent. No late-night arguments, no distant laughter, not even the faint hum of passing cars. Just silence. Too much silence. I carried my mug into the living room, settling next to Luke on the couch. He glanced at me and smirked.
"Told you you'd burn it."
"I didn't," I protested, though the sting on my tongue said otherwise. Luke chuckled, his smile softening as he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear.
"You're terrible at lying."
I stuck my tongue out at him and grabbed the remote. The radio was playing softly in the background, some late-night jazz station we liked to leave on when the television wasn't on. The smooth saxophone notes filled the room, a soothing backdrop to our quiet evening.
"You know,"
Luke said, setting his tablet down,
"I think it's weird that we haven't heard from Mrs. Davies tonight. She usually stomps around like she's hosting a wrestling match up there."
"Maybe she finally fell asleep at a normal hour," I suggested.
"Or,"
he said with a mock-serious expression,
"she's been abducted by aliens. You ever think about that?"
"Every day," I replied dryly. The radio cut out mid-note. We both froze. The sudden silence felt deafening, almost tangible. Luke tilted his head, frowning.
"Geez, signal must have dropped."
I was about to agree when a crackle of static broke through the quiet. The radio sputtered, the static growing louder, almost like a whispering hiss. Then came the voice.
"This is an emergency alert."
The voice was flat and mechanical, devoid of any humanity. It sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at Luke, whose frown deepened.
"Is this some kind of test?"
he murmured.
"Remain indoors. Lock all windows and doors. Do not look outside. Do not respond to knocks or voices."
The message repeated once, twice. Then the static returned and the radio fell silent. Luke reached for the remote, turning the volume knob up and down, as if that would somehow fix it.
"Weird,"
he said, his tone lighter than his expression.
"That's not normal, right?"
"No."
"Probably a prank,"
he said after a moment, leaning back and folding his arms.
"You know how people hack into broadcasts sometimes. It's creepy, but it's not like the world's ending."
I didn't respond. Something about the voice felt wrong, unnatural, like it wasn't meant to be heard by human ears. Minutes passed in strained silence. I tried to focus on my cocoa, but my hands kept trembling, spilling tiny drops onto the coaster. Luke seemed unbothered, scrolling through his tablet again, but I caught him glancing at the radio more than once. Then came the knock. It was faint at first, barely audible over the silence. 3 soft taps. I froze, staring at the front door across the room. Luke raised an eyebrow.
"You expecting someone?"
"No," I whispered. The knocks came again, louder this time. 4 sharp raps. My stomach twisted. The radio's message echoed in my head. "Do not respond to knocks or voices."
"Maybe it's Mrs. Davies,"
Luke said, already standing.
"She's always forgetting her keys."
"Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "Don't open it." He gave me a look.
"Come on. You really think some spooky broadcast is a reason to ignore a neighbor?"
"Luke, please," I said, my voice shaking. "What if it's not her?" He hesitated, his brow furrowing. Then, as if to answer my question, a voice called through the door. It wasn't Mrs. Davies.
"Please,"
it said, soft and trembling.
"I need help, let me in."
The words were human, but the tone wasn't. Luke took a step toward the door, but I tightened my grip on his arm. "Don't," I begged.
It's probably just some drunk. Relax, okay? I'll check the peephole.
I watched, heart pounding as he crossed the room. He leaned toward the peephole, his face tense. A second later, he recoiled, stumbling back. His face had gone pale. What? What is it?
There's nothing there,
he said, his voice hollow.
No one.
The knocks came again, harder this time. The voice followed, louder and more insistent.
Please, let me in. I'm scared.
Luke backed away from the door, his eyes wide. The radio crackled to life again.
Do not respond to them,
the voice said, sharper now.
Do not let them in.
The radio fell silent again, leaving the apartment steeped in a thick, oppressive quiet. My ears strained against the stillness, desperate for any sound that might explain what was happening. My heart hammered in my chest and every nerve in my body screamed that something was wrong. Luke paced the room, his movements jittery. He was trying to keep his composure, but I could see the unease creeping into his face. He would glance at the door, then back at the radio, his lips pressed into a thin line. The knocks had stopped for the moment, but that only made it worse. At least when it was knocking, we knew where it was. Now the silence felt alive, heavy and expectant, like it was waiting for us to make the wrong move. I sat frozen on the couch, clutching a throw pillow against my chest as if it could shield me. My mind raced through every possible explanation, each more outlandish than the last. A prank? A blackout? No, none of it fit. The voice outside the door, the strange warning from the radio, it wasn't normal. It wasn't natural. Luke broke the silence with a frustrated exhale, running a hand through his hair. He moved to the window and peeked through the blinds again, his breath fogging the glass.
Nothing,
he muttered, his voice distant.
The street's empty. No cars, no people. Not even the flicker of a TV in the other apartments.
I didn't answer. My thoughts were fixed on the radio's words. Do not respond to them. Do not let them in. My gut churned with the terrifying realization that whatever was happening was beyond human comprehension. Luke stepped away from the window and grabbed his phone off the coffee table, muttering about calling someone, anyone. A second later, he cursed under his breath and held up the screen. No signal, not even a single bar.
It's like the whole world just shut off,
he said, his voice tight. I stared at the blank screen, my chest tightening. Try the landline, I managed to say. He moved to the kitchen and picked up the receiver. I watched as he pressed it to his ear, then slowly lowered it, his face pale.
Dead,
he said.
It's completely dead.
The knocks started again. Each thud reverberated through the apartment like a heartbeat, steady and unrelenting. I clenched the pillow tighter, every muscle in my body screaming to run, but there was nowhere to go. Luke stood frozen by the kitchen counter, his eyes fixed on the door. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then the voice returned.
Let me in,
it said, soft and trembling. It sounded almost human, but not quite. There was something off about the cadence, the way it lingered on each word.
Please, I'm hurt. I need help.
I bit my lip, hard enough to taste blood. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Why didn't it just break the door down if it wanted in? Why did it ask? That was the worst part. The asking. Luke took a hesitant step toward the door, but I shot up from the couch and grabbed his arm, shaking my head furiously. No, I whispered. Don't.
It sounds like someone's hurt. What if...
No, I said again, my grip tightening. It's not human, Luke. You know it's not. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he was going to argue. But then the voice spoke again, louder this time.
I'm scared. Please, let me in.
The tone shifted, the pleading note replaced by something darker. My skin crawled as the words hung in the air, echoing unnaturally. Luke looked at me, his eyes wide with fear, and I saw it in his face. He believed me now. Whatever was on the other side of that door, it wasn't human. The radio crackled back to life, the static harsher than before. I turned to it instinctively, but Luke kept his eyes on the door. The voice on the radio was the same as before, flat and mechanical, but now there was a sense of urgency to it.
They are inside the building. Lock all entrances. Do not respond to them. Trust only the broadcast.
The thought sent a wave of nausea through me. Our apartment building was old. with narrow hallways and creaky stairwells. If something was inside, there weren't many places to hide. Luke moved quickly, grabbing a chair from the kitchen and wedging it under the doorknob. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little less exposed.
What now?
He asked, his voice strained. He looked at me, his face pale but determined, and I realized he was waiting for me to come up with an answer, like I was supposed to know what to do. Before I could respond, a sound echoed from above us, a heavy crash, followed by the slow, deliberate creak of floorboards. Something was moving in the apartment above. Mrs. Davies. Luke cursed under his breath, grabbing a kitchen knife from the counter.
I'm going up there,
he said.
If something's happening, we need to—
No, I cut him off, stepping in his path. You heard the broadcast. We can't leave. We have to stay inside.
I'm not just going to sit here while something's out there,
he said, his voice rising.
We can't just do nothing.
The crash came again. Luke sidestepped me and headed for the door. I tried to stop him, but he was already pulling the chair away. My heart raced as he unlocked the door and cracked it open, just enough to peek into the hallway. He froze, his body rigid.
What the hell?
He whispered. What is it? I asked. He didn't answer. Slowly, he stepped out into the hallway. The door swung shut behind him, and I was left alone in the apartment, paralyzed by fear. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear anything. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the scream. It wasn't even human. It was deep and guttural, a sound that seemed to echo from everywhere at once. I stumbled back, covering my ears, but the sound burrowed into my skull, reverberating in my bones. It stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was worse. Luke, I called, my voice shaking. The doorknob rattled, and I jumped. A low, distorted voice spoke from the other side.
Let me in.
The doorknob rattled again, harder this time, as if something was testing its strength against the lock. My breath caught in my throat as the voice on the other side repeated itself, low and guttural.
Let me in.
It wasn't Luke. It couldn't be. The sound was wrong, too deep, like it was mimicking his voice. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the coffee table, and landed hard on the floor. The muffled static of the radio sprang to life once more, filling the apartment with its oppressive hum. The voice followed, cold and mechanical, cutting through the noise like a knife.
Do not open the door. Do not acknowledge them.
Tears blurred my vision as I crawled backward, away from the door. My mind screamed at me to do something, to run, to hide, but my body refused to move. The only sound in the apartment was the relentless rasp of my breathing and the rhythmic click of the doorknob as it twisted back and forth. The voice changed. It no longer carried Luke's tone. Instead, it was softer, pleading, almost childlike.
Please,
It whimpered.
I'm hurt. I need help.
The words tugged at me, and for one horrifying moment, I felt an urge to move toward the door. I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms, until the sharp pain jolted me back to my senses. The voice outside shifted again, the tone darkening, losing its desperate edge.
You can't stay in there forever. I'll get in eventually.
The words were casual now, almost taunting, as if it was enjoying the game. The radio crackled again.
They are adapting. Do not listen to them. Do not trust what you see or hear.
My stomach sank. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just trying to break in. It was learning, testing me. I clambered to my feet and stumbled toward the kitchen, yanking open drawers in search of something, anything, to defend myself with. My hands closed around a heavy rolling pin, and I gripped it tightly, though I had no illusions about how effective it would be. The apartment seemed darker now, the shadows pooling in the corners, stretching longer than they should. I felt them pressing in on me, thick and suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The air was so heavy I could barely draw a breath. My thoughts were scattered, unraveling like frayed threads. Was this thing inside already? Could it even be stopped? A loud crash echoed through the building, snapping me out of my spiral. It came from somewhere below, followed by the sound of splintering wood and the sharp metallic groan of twisting metal. The thing wasn't waiting anymore. It was tearing its way through. I backed into the corner of the living room, keeping the rolling pin raised like a lifeline. My eyes darted between the front door and the hallway leading to the bedroom, every instinct screaming that I was running out of time. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They were slow and impossibly heavy, reverberating through the walls as they climbed the stairs. They stopped outside my door, and I could feel the weight of its presence, like a storm, bearing down on me. A shadow moved beneath the doorframe, darker than the dim light spilling in from the hall. The knob turned one final time and the voice spoke again, clearer and sharper than before.
I'm here.
The radio exploded into static, and my knees buckled as the sound tore through the apartment, loud enough to make the windows rattle. I dropped the rolling pin, clamping my hands over my ears as the static gave way to the same flat voice.
Evacuate immediately.
The words didn't make sense. It had told me not to leave before, to stay inside. Now it was telling me to run? My mind raced, struggling to decide whether to trust the broadcast or follow its earlier warning. Another crash sounded, this one closer, and I knew I couldn't stay put. I bolted toward the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands fumbled with the lock, and for a moment I thought it wouldn't hold. The hallway outside the apartment groaned with the sound of shifting weight, like something massive pressing against the walls. The floor beneath me trembled, each vibration sharper than the last. I moved to the window, yanking the blinds aside. The street below was empty, but something about it looked wrong. The edges of the buildings shimmered and warped, as if I were looking at them through a heat haze. A dull orange glow spread across the horizon, but it wasn't the sun. It was something else, something unnatural. My stomach churned as I realized there was no way down. The fire escape was gone. Where it should have been was only a jagged void, a tear in the fabric of the world that seemed to stretch into infinity. I stumbled back from the window, my legs shaking. The bedroom door rattled, a deep groan reverberating through the wood. I braced myself against the wall, clutching the rolling pin with white-knuckled hands. The voice returned, but this time it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the radio, faint but unmistakable.
Trust only the broadcast.
I stared at the radio, my mind spinning. What was I supposed to do? The broadcast had told me to evacuate, but how? There was no way out, no escape. The door behind me cracked, splinters flying across the room as something massive pushed against it. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering a silent prayer as the door gave way. The sound that followed was indescribable. A low, guttural growl that made the air vibrate. My body froze, every muscle locking in place as an unnatural chill washed over me. I don't know how long I stayed there, frozen in the corner, but when I opened my eyes, the room was empty. The door was still hanging off its hinges, and the apartment was bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. The radio was silent, the red indicator light blinking steadily, as if nothing had happened. I staggered out into the living room, my legs weak beneath me. The front door hung open, the hallway beyond empty and dark. I stood there, trembling, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the silence stretched on, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. Then the radio spoke one final time.
Survivors will be monitored. Thank you for your compliance.
The apartment was silent, but the air still felt heavy, as if the weight of what had happened lingered long after the danger had passed. My legs trembled as I stepped toward the front door, careful not to make a sound. The hallway beyond was dark, the faint flicker of a dying light bulb casting intermittent shadows on the cracked walls. The radio's final words echoed in my head. Survivors will be monitored. The phrase felt wrong, sterile, as though survival had been reduced to a checkbox on a list. But I was alive. Somehow I had made it. The walk down the stairs felt endless. Each creak of the old wood beneath my feet sent a jolt of fear through me, but nothing followed. The oppressive sense of being watched was gone, replaced by an empty, hollow dread that sank deeper with every step. When I finally reached the lobby, I paused. The front doors were wide open, revealing the street outside. It looked normal, almost too normal. The streetlights glowed faintly, their orange light spilling over cracked sidewalks and empty storefronts. Cars sat parked in neat rows, their windshields fogged with condensation. It was quiet, but not the suffocating silence from before. This was the quiet of abandonment, of a world that had moved on without me. I stepped outside, clutching my arms against the chill in the air. The city stretched out before me, familiar and alien at the same time. The edges of the buildings still shimmered faintly, as if the world hadn't fully solidified after whatever had happened. There were no people, no sounds of life, just the faint hum of electricity and the distant howl of the wind. I wandered the streets for what felt like hours, searching for signs of life. My voice cracked as I called out, my pleas swallowed by the empty streets. My phone was still dead, the screen black and lifeless. Even the street signs seemed different, their letters shifting and blurring when I tried to read them. I turned a corner and froze. A figure stood at the far end of the street, motionless and shrouded in shadow. My heart leapt into my throat as I took a hesitant step back, my breath catching. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and piercing. The radio in my hand crackled suddenly, the static sharp and grating. A familiar voice broke through, flat and mechanical.
Do not engage. Trust only the broadcast.
I didn't wait to see if the figure would move. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the empty streets as the static on the radio grew louder, almost drowning out my frantic breaths. When I finally stopped, I found myself back in my apartment building, staring up at the cracked facade. The radio had gone silent again, but its presence in my hand felt heavier than ever. I didn't know what else to do. There was nowhere else to go. Now I sit in the dim light of my apartment, staring at the blinking red light on the radio. I don't know how much time has passed, or if it matters anymore. The world outside is a strange, twisted reflection of what it once was, and I'm not sure if anyone else is left to see it. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the static again. It whispers faintly, just on the edge of hearing, as if it's waiting for me to listen. And sometimes, just for a moment, I think I hear Luke's voice in the hum calling my name. The broadcast's words replay in my mind over and over. Survivors will be monitored. The blinking red light on the radio froze, turning solid. A single, sharp beep cut through the silence, followed by the crackle of static. My breath hitched as the voice returned, mechanical and hollow, but this time it wasn't a warning.
Observation complete. Initiate retrieval.
A deep resonant hum filled the apartment, vibrating through the floor. The temperature dropped instantly, a cold so sharp it burned. Then the front door swung open. I didn't move. The old wooden door groaned on its hinges, drifting open in agonizing slow motion, revealing the darkened hallway beyond. A shape appeared in the doorway, tall, impossibly still. The dim hallway light flickered, distorting its outline, making it difficult to focus. My eyes watered as I tried to make sense of it. Then it shifted inside, not walked, shifted. Like a glitch in reality, it simply shifted forward without crossing the space in between. A deep, warbling sound filled the room. My stomach twisted as the light around me dimmed, as if the entire apartment was being unmade. The figure tilted its head, the motion jerky, unnatural. I could feel it watching me. The radio crackled again, and this time the voice was softer, almost pleased.
Acknowledged. Subject secured.
Darkness swallowed the apartment. The last thing I felt was a pressure, not on my skin, but under it. Something shifting, twisting, unraveling. Then just static. Hello there, thank you for watching. How did you like the creepy atmosphere in this story? Do let me know in the comments below. If you want a similar story, check the story on screen. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay creepy, and see you in the next story.